I'm Matt. I grew up in the country. When I was 16, I got an apprenticeship as a heavy-duty mechanic. By the time I was 21, I was fully qualified. But I had a dream that I wanted to travel the world. So to make that possible, I needed more money. So I then decided to head up north to do fly-in, fly-out. I was 21, I was a heavy-duty mechanic. I was on about $140,000 a year. I'd been up north for about 8 months when I decided to fly home to book my world trip. When I got back up north, it was coming up to Christmas, and the company I was worked for decided to put on a Christmas party. For the 8 months that I've been up north, I didn't drink. And the reason I didn't drink is because I didn't want to jeopardise my job. I wasn't the best person when I drank alcohol. It sort of affected me in a lot of bad ways. So I knew that I didn't want to drink because there's a possibility that I could mess up and lose my job. So the night of the 14th of December, the company I worked for decided to put on a Christmas party. That night I decided to drink. And the reason that I decided to drink was because I'd finished my job, and on the 16th of December I was flying home. On the night of the 14th at the Christmas party, I drank too much. I don't remember a lot about the night. I just remember waking up in bed the next day. But also during the week, I organised for myself and 15 people that I worked with to go out to Karijini National Park. So on the morning of the 15th, I woke up, I went down to a friend's room. When I got there, he passed me a beer and I started drinking again. All that day on the way out to the gorge, I kept drinking. By the time I got to the gorge, I drank too much once again. So I then decided to stop drinking and sobered up a bit. We then made our way down to the gorge, and I was one of the first ones down there. There was the 15 of us there at the time when I decided to dive into the water. After diving into the water, I then swam over to the waterfall, which was over in the back of the gorge. Once I got to the waterfall, there was a ledge underneath it, so I climbed up onto the ledge. I was sitting on the ledge with a girl at the time called Sonia that I worked with. I was talking to Sonia about how good life was, how happy I was, how all my dreams were coming true. And it was at that time that I noticed that someone dived off the top of the waterfall. I then decided that I wanted to do it. There was no peer pressure, there was no one around forcing me to do it. But because of my situation with the alcohol, I decided that I had to prove a point, I had to be a hero. So I then made my way off the ledge over to the edge of the gorge, and as I've gone to climb out, there was a sign saying no climbing. Instead of listening and reading it and following it, I decided to use that sign to pull myself up and started making my way up to the top of the waterfall. Halfway up to the waterfall, there was a rock off to the right. I detoured onto it and walked out onto the rock. I was originally going to jump from there into the water, but as I looked down, there was rocks sticking out. It was quite dangerous. So it was at that time that I decided to go back onto the track and make my way up to the top of the waterfall. It was a dead end, and I realised what I was doing was very stupid. As I made my way back down to the gorge, I stepped back out onto that large rock about halfway up, and as I stepped onto it, my right foot slipped. It was at that point that I knew I was going to fall down into the water. I sort of felt that I had two options. Option one was just to tumble down and take whatever was coming, or the second option was to put my hands over my head and try and jump out as far as I could. Even though I knew what was below me, I knew that I was going to hurt myself, I decided to put the arms over my head and jump out as far as I could. As I've dove down off the rock with my arms over my head, I sort of landed and hit the rocks at about half a somersault. It was at that time that I rolled over and checked that everything was okay. I wiggled my fingers, I wiggled my toes, and everything was okay. My initial reaction was to get out of there. The shock started to kick in. So it was at that time that I started to swim across the gorge. I got about halfway across the gorge, and a friend of mine at the time called out to me, and he called out, "Matty, are you okay?" And as I've gone to answer him, I've turned my head, and as I've turned my head, my neck's gone. It was at that time that I was completely paralysed from my shoulders down. I couldn't move, I could barely breathe, and I was in the middle of the gorge. It was at that time that I decided that I needed help, and I was in a lot of trouble. So what I decided to do was to move my head backwards and forwards, trying to get myself above the water. After getting back above the water, I then tried to scream for help, but no one could hear me because of my voice was quiet, the waterfall was flowing, and I couldn't move. So another thing that I wanted to do was to wave my arms, but once again I couldn't do that. So to look at me from someone else's view, I just looked normal with my head above the water. No one had known that I had a spinal cord injury. No one knew that I was paralysed. It was at that stage that I started to sink very fast. It got to the point where all the water around me was completely black. I thought that was going to be the end. I thought, this is it, I'm going to die. Lucky for me at that stage, one of the guys that was there duck dived down, pulled me up and dragged me to the edge of the gorge. It was at that stage, at the edge of the gorge, I looked down at my body. It was floating beside me, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't wiggle my fingers, I couldn't wiggle my toes, and I couldn't feel the water on my body. After the rescue, I was then flown down to Perth. I was then taken into Royal Perth Hospital Emergency Department. After emergency department, I was then taken in for some x-rays. The x-ray showed that my C4 vertebrae had dislodged and hit my spinal cord. After the x-rays, I then had a halo fitted where I had 5 days laying flat on my back with a 5 kilo weight pulling on the halo. After those 5 days, I went in for an operation where they fixed the vertebrae of my neck. After the operation, the halo was removed and my neck was fixed. But the spinal cord was still damaged. There is no cure. There is no medicine that can fix that spinal cord. Even though the operation can fix the bone, the spinal cord is permanently damaged. I was then in rehab for 3.5 months. During that time, I didn't regain much use of my body back. So after the rehab, it was then time to move home. Once moving home, I still have to live my life as I used to, but I'm unable to do it by myself, so I have carers come in 3 times a day to look after me. This impacts on my life hugely, as I'm unable to live a social free life that I did once before. I'm unable to go out with mates when I want to. I'm unable to jump in my car and take off. I have to catch taxis everywhere. So it's all these restrictions that come with a spinal cord injury that aren't just for myself, but they also come with the family. Looking back at my accident, the decision to drink as much alcohol as I did affected my choices that day. The choice to want to jump off the top of the waterfall, but also the choice to avoid the signs that were to stop me from climbing up to the top of the gorge. Because of those decisions I made that were influenced by the amount of alcohol I drank, I now have to live with this disability for the rest of my life.